Welcome. You are tuning into our series, Teaching Students During Civil Unrest. This is Part 2, Facilitating Transformative Conversations. My name is Grant Twyman, and I'm the Equity and Inclusion Program Manager here at Clover Park School District. I usually explain my work across 4 focus areas. The first is district. This includes work with the board of directors, district administrators, and support staff, the strategic side of EDI work. School staff. This includes the educators in each building and in terms of professional development. Third is our students. And here we're talking about student voice, student self-advocacy, and empowerment. It's shifting power dynamics with adults and students. And lastly, families and communities. It's working collaboratively with our families and CBOs or community-based organizations with diverse cultural capital to support educator professional development and student success. And now that I shared the focus of my work, let me say this. I am not the equity police. My role is more of an internal consultant and force multiplier. I'm committed to equipping professional educators and district staff to do what's best for each student. We titled Part 2, Facilitating Transformative Conversations. Our goal with this session is to provide a roadmap to educators and building administrators on engaging with students on topics like race, equity, inclusion, and justice. The tools we present are almost universal and can be used for almost any topic, but today we're going to focus on the current issues that's sparking unprecedented civil unrest locally, nationally, and globally. Here are our 4 course objectives. Number 1, a quick review of Part 1, our teaching students during civil unrest. Part 2, introduce the 5 steps to facilitating transformative conversations. A quick note to remember is that conversations in this presentation are continuous, ongoing. It's kind of like a multi-lane highway where there are on-ramps and off-ramps, merging periods, fast lanes, slow lanes. And as you think about where you are on this highway or on this journey, recognize we all have the potential to be helpful in terms of progress or hindrances, causing roadblocks or interfering with the flow of traffic. The conversation we are talking about, it's not just verbal dialogue, but it's ongoing verbal dialogue in addition to the exchange of daily interactions. It is critical to remember that as the adults and people in power in the school and in the classroom, our daily interactions and series of responses, it's communicating a narrative about what is valuable and what we value, who is valuable and who belongs. And so let me say that again. It's critical to remember that as the adults and people in power in the school and in the classroom, our daily interactions and series of responses, it's communicating a narrative about what is valuable, what we value, who is valuable, and who belongs. And objective number 3, we'll practice steps 2 and some of step 3. And then our 4th objective is we're going to outline some practical steps to navigate the minefield. And some of this will be a review from phase 1. In part 1, we introduced the concept of mirrors and windows. The mirror is the intentional time that we invest to be self-reflective and engage in self-evaluation. It's a critical component of our work so that we do not become stagnant or fall into complacency thinking. An example is, they aren't talking about me, I'm already doing these things. Those thoughts often reflect a deficit mindset. We should be intentionally doing mirror work to examine our beliefs, worldview, perspective, preferences, and biases. We all have them, but we rarely face them. When we do mirror work, it can be uncomfortable. Don't look away. Discomfort is not a negative feeling. Discomfort during the mirror work is an opportunity to learn and to grow. And then the window. The window is the capacity to look through to another perspective, worldview, and experience. It's spending time hearing or reading about different experiences, opinions, and perspectives. The window work can also be uncomfortable because we tend to live in a bubble. We often miss the realities of the world around us, especially the reality of oppression, marginalization, and systemic injustice. Don't look away. Discomfort during the window work is an opportunity to grow, not indulge in pity, but a dose of reality to spark empathy and motivate us to pursue justice. We talked a little bit about the district's position and how the district has been processing the current events. To sum it up, I'd like to quote our superintendent, Ron Banner. As professional educators, we are not neutral. We stand against injustice, and we are on a journey to advocate for more justice and more fairness in our society. We also said in part 1 that the institution under the microscope and under the most scrutiny right now in our nation is local law enforcement and police departments. Now, whether that's true or not, the bigger question and more critical question for us is, who do we think is next? I'd argue public education is the next institution that will be under the microscope in our nation. And if that's the case, what will the microscope with the dial turned to equity, inclusion, and justice reveal about the education system in our country? If they turn the lens, if the lens is turned to equity, inclusion, and justice, what will it reveal about Clover Park School District? And then you can ask the question with more specificity in terms of areas. What will it reveal about our hiring practices? What will it reveal about our curriculum, our pedagogy, our models of intervention, our discipline data, our classroom culture, our teacher-staff biases? These are moments of reflection. These are moments of critical evaluation for us personally and organizationally. Another component in terms of review, in part 1, we spent some time doing mirror work with self-reflection. And two key questions that framed our mirror work in part 1 was, the first was, how are the historically marginalized students doing under your leadership? And then the second, how are the historically marginalized students doing in your classrooms? And the two questions are asked very specifically because the first deals with just overall under your leadership and authority in the school, right? But if for you, you're all about your classroom, then we have to ask the question, how are the historically marginalized students doing in your classroom? And then some sub-questions that are important for self-reflection. Do the historically marginalized students feel targeted? Do they feel celebrated? Are the Black children in your classroom being groomed for injustice? Are the Black children in your classroom being groomed for mistreatment, degradation, and harm? Are the Black children in your classroom being groomed for low expectations and self-hate? Are there students feeling incompetent because they are English language learners? Are the Native American Indigenous students feeling isolated and ignored? Are the LGBTQ students afraid, invisible, shamed? If we are not intentionally learning how to facilitate space for our historically marginalized students to feel empowered, gifted, valuable, celebrated, and supported, we are probably grooming them for more injustice. If we are intentionally researching authors, engineers, inventors, physicians, and historians that reflect their image, their heritage, their demographic, we are probably grooming them for more injustice. I have it titled as Navigating the Minefield Intentionally, because sometimes when approaching conversations around race, equity, inclusion, and justice, people are afraid to take a step or say something because they're unsure where the mines are or the explosive devices. And with a good heart and good intent, people don't want to bring harm or do anything wrong to bring harm to themselves or harm to others. And so we tend to freeze and hesitate and trepidation. And so we'll quickly recap some of the points of wisdom to navigate the minefield. We won't have time to work through all of them, but I'll circle some of the main ones and we'll highlight those. Not many guarantees in life, but I guarantee you that if you step on one of these mines, you will cause harm, and most likely to your students. And so as we talk through them, think critically, reflect, and take it to heart, we can navigate the minefield successfully. So the first, I'll just, again, in terms of recap, recognize collective identity. And so we want to avoid the assumption that normally says, well, if it didn't happen to you, why do you care so much? Or you shouldn't be this bothered or impacted because it hasn't happened to you. And that's ignoring the reality of collective identity. Your students can feel what others may experience. And sometimes your students see themselves in the experience of others. And that's generally speaking. It's not true in every single case or every single instance, but things can happen across the country to a completely different person that they don't know and they're not related to, but it feels personal. It feels like it happened to them. And so it's important to realize that collective identity is alive and well. And if we approach these conversations with this individualistic mentality or ideology, that it's all about you as an individual and what's happened to you, we'll miss the realities of collective identity and the ability to really understand what our students are saying or experiencing. The other piece I have here is create space for students to express the range of emotions and feelings. And here's where I'll emphasize, anger is not a negative emotion. Expect students to be passionate, intense, and even angry about injustice. And the reality is, I'm more worried about the kids or students who are apathetic, who are silent and indifferent about injustice. I'd be concerned with students who could care less about racism and injustice far more than the students who are angry about it. Because if you think about it to a degree, we all should be bothered. We all should be moved. We all should have levels of anger about injustice, about discrimination, about racism. And so, again, anger is not a negative emotion. It's just one of many emotions. And so create space for students to express the range of emotions that may come about these topics. The other thing I'll mention, along the same lines is I'd ask ourselves, how are we creating the culture and classroom environment where students unlearn racist attitudes, biases, and prejudices? One of the things that I love about the Clover Park School District Board of Directors is that they define success more than metrics. They define success in terms of character, leadership, collaboration, and a commitment to learning, right? Lifelong learning. So it's more than the metrics. It's more than attendance, behavior, course completion. The Clover Park School District is focused on and has a vision to grow students as stakeholders to impact our community. And that deals more than the quantifiable metrics, but also these qualitative factors of leadership and collaboration and character. And so we should be thinking about creating the type of classroom and culture where students unlearn toxic attitudes and discriminatory behaviors. Facilitate students advocating for each other. This generation rallies around causes and a mission to support and advocate for different groups. Even in cases where they don't fully understand the mission or the cause, they come alive in advocacy. And so we can leverage that. We can support that feature of this generation and leverage it for pursuing educational justice in our context. Here's an interesting one. We are catching up, which is simply to say, approach the conversations with humility. We haven't always gotten this right as a school or as a district. So let's be humble. We are humble about the journey, and we are committed to creating a community that breeds equity. And then the last point in terms of review, do not fall into the all lives matter trap. Everybody knows all lives matter. The point at this time is to emphasize and affirm that Black lives matter. The statement or tagline does not say only Black lives matter. It is saying that Black life matters. also, or to. And we covered this in session 1, the difference between Black Lives Matter, the movement, and the statement versus Black Lives Matter, the organization, or LLCC. Those are two different things, right? Again, we unpacked that in session 1. We're not going to rehash it completely here. And then the graphics that you see here on the slide, they're intentional. Keep in mind that as we sit contemplative, our students are in the minefield that we are trying to cautiously navigate. Your students specifically are historically marginalized students. They don't get to intellectualize the conversation absent from social and institutional harms waiting for them. Recognize your privilege if you aren't part of those marginalized identities. Realize in our waiting, our planning, our processing, students' lives are on the line. Historically marginalized students live in the minefield. And we aren't talking about your students of poverty. We are talking about students, rich or poor, that have identities that push them to the margins of justice. And so here are our 5 steps. Step 1, understand the importance of having conversations about race, equity, and justice with students. Step 2, create space to hear from students about race, equity, and justice. Position yourself as a learner and contributor, so take a ton of notes. Step 3, compile the notes in a succinct document and collaborate with your peers and colleagues to discuss themes and through lines. Step 4, create space to backbrief students based on your succinct notes to ensure you have an understanding. At this point, provide an opportunity for students to add, remove, and/or modify your understanding based on your notes. And then step 5, create a collaborative space for students and adults to develop action items and next steps to pursue equity, inclusion, and justice in your context. To summarize, step 1, wake up. Step 2, listen. Step 3, synthesication. Step 4, backbrief. Step 5, partner. Step 1, wake up.
You always have a fight you don't see coming. I think that there's a historical river that is running red with the blood of truth tellers. The beauty of being American, when we're scared, we reach for our higher selves, not our lower selves.
I'm angry at 31. You angry at 16. Y'all coming with a better way? Because we ain't doing it. Oh my God. And I have a 5-year-old son, and it ain't happening. The same exact thing night after night after night. Coming with a better way.
I feel a rage this afternoon, a deep, all-consuming rage.
My people don't want no trouble. We've got enough struggle.
I feel a sadness this afternoon, one that makes me feel spineless, one that paralyzes my hand and my feet, one that confuses me.
Dr. King was a young man when he got involved. Cesar Chavez was a young man. Malcolm X was a young man. The leaders of the feminist movement were young people. Leaders of union movements were young people. You've communicated a sense of urgency that is as powerful and as transformative as anything that I've seen in recent years.
No justice, no peace. No justice, no peace. No justice, no peace. No justice, no peace. No justice, no peace.
Whatever position I occupied, it was as the result of my colleagues, my comrades in the movement.
And I'm sitting, and I'm listening, and I'm smiling, and I'm remembering, and I feel a love this afternoon.
Just make sure that we now follow through. And it's very important for us to take the momentum that has been created as a society, as a country, and say, this is something that's got to change.
The very fact that we have filed these charges means that we believe in them. But what I do not believe is that one successful prosecution can rectify the hurt and loss that so many people feel. The solution to that pain will be slow and difficult work of constructing justice and fairness in our society.
He did what?
At this point in the situation, as professional educators, we have to be in the game. There's no room to bury our heads in the sand or be intentionally blind. Realize the civil unrest that we are seeing is unprecedented in our lifetime. Be reminded we are teaching, leading, and connecting with students that are having these conversations, wrestling with many feelings and emotions, and in some cases are on the front lines of change and progress. Remember, we are obliged to engage, not in a legal or policy sense, but in a way that we are socially aware and emotionally intelligent. In part 1, we said we run the risk of being irrelevant if we don't engage. I actually think the stakes are higher. If we don't intentionally create time and space to have these conversations and partner with our students for change, we run the risk of being irrelevant, yes, but worse, we may indicate we are either indifferent, apathetic, or complicit in injustice. As a result, we have to engage. We have to do something. One of the goals in this session is to help navigate the current environment and effectively teach. Your students are looking for someone they can trust, someone that understands them or at least is seeking to understand them. Your students learn best from adults that they can trust. And in some cases, this may be a paradigm shift. We should all be working, growing, and aiming to be followable. We should be working to earn the right to lead and teach this generation. Step 2, listen. Create space to hear from students about race, equity, and justice. Position yourself as a learner and contributor. Take a ton of notes. And so here we listed a few do's and don'ts when you're engaged in step number 2, which is a really fun step, really exciting and really engaging. So here's a couple of do's, right? Bring your expertise. We are trained facilitators, and so let's bring that into this conversation. The ability to facilitate really good conversation with depth and insight and perspective and multiple perspectives. Do not bring your agenda. Here's another do. Ask good questions. So that means prepping, right? In the student dialogue, we asked 4 questions that I think are really good questions that deal with the capacity to advocate for others, advocate for themselves, and even contextualize some of the things that they're seeing in the world to what they want to hear from teachers. So ask good questions. Feel free to use the 4 questions that we asked in the student dialogue. Give students time to prep. And so this doesn't have to be random. This doesn't have to be on the spot. We can give our students time to prep based on the questions or topics that we want to engage, if that's necessary. You can play a video to break the ice. Consider a facilitator with cultural capital. And this is not just the one staff of color that's in your building, right? If that's your context, or even your students of color. It could be, right? It could be the staff of color. It could be your students of color. But it doesn't have to be, right? And as far as in the do not category, you'll see not to expect staff of color to carry undue burdens, right? So this is not their mission, right? And so we want to be sure we're not tokenizing folks. And so you want to have those conversations with a lot of being candid and being honest. If this is something if this is the direction that we want to go, if your staff of color want to take on this role, let's have those conversations. In another way, right, there are other facilitators with cultural capital that you can rely on. In some cases, it's the staff member who's younger and closer to the age of your students. In some cases, it's the staff member who has that rapport and those relational connections with your students. In some cases, it's community members, right? Folks in the community who look like your students, who relate to your students, and can facilitate a conversation for you to listen in, right, on what they're saying. And so what's important if you're going to have a facilitator, it doesn't opt you out of this process. It doesn't opt you out of this step. It just facilitates a conversation, gives you the opportunity to listen in or get a feedback loop some other way. Consider creating a project out of it. Collaboratively develop community agreements to talk about race, equity, and justice. These aren't topics that we deal with explicitly in our classrooms. And so when you're engaging in these topics, it may be helpful to create some community agreements around having these particular conversations. That may be a good idea for you. And then take a ton of notes, right? So I've been saying that over and over because you really want to position yourself as a learner, as a contributor, and allow students to share, to talk, to engage, and even engage in some academic discourse, debate, or dialogue. Do not bring your agenda. Do not expect your staff of color to carry this burden. Don't expect to solve everything or anything. And lastly, we have here, do not make promises, right? So these are just some kind of rules to the game when you're engaged in step 2, if you're going to do it well. Step 3, synthesication. And don't go and try and look up this word because I made it up. But synthesication deals with compiling the notes from step 2 in a succinct document. And then also you can collaborate with your peers and colleagues to discuss themes and through lines. And so one of the ways that I like to organize step 3 is based on the notes from the conversation with the students. I write out themes or topics and then some discussion points based on what they said. And here it's really helpful to literally just grab quotes from the dialogue. And then so you'll just map out, here was topic 1, topic 2, topic 3. Here were the discussion points that support that topic. And then step 4 is the back brief. And forgive the phrase, this is for sure military lingo. But essentially the back brief is creating space to report back to your students based on your notes to ensure you've heard them correctly, you've heard them accurately. The other piece that's important here is to allow students to add, remove, and or modify your understanding. And this is the case where we kind of shift the power dynamics. So the back brief is incredibly important. And in terms of equity, we have to deal with power dynamics. And when we report back to students what they shared and then give them an opportunity to correct what we heard or understood, that's sharing power. And it's seeing power not as a limited resource that only the adults or the favorite students have access to, but power is an unlimited resource in our community that we all have access to for the betterment of us all. And so here's a few sentences as examples that you could take with you into your back brief. And the words here are chosen really carefully that facilitates that shifting of power and that shifting of culture in our classrooms. And then step 5, create a collaborative space for students and adults to develop action items and next steps to pursue equity, inclusion, and justice. And this is probably the step that everybody likes to jump to right in the beginning. Like, how do we fix it? How do we solve it? And I want to caution you, even though this is really exciting, it's very strategic, and you're talking about forward momentum and motion, don't miss that the entire process, steps 1 through 4, was incredibly transformative as well. And so sometimes as we engage in this intentional process of creating community and being collaborative, that process is just as important, or in some cases more important, than the product that we come out with or the outcome. And so in terms of managing expectations, sometimes the next step may be another conversation or more conversations to build trust and understanding with more depth, right? And so it's not always a super fancy action item or strategic plan. In some cases, we'll come to those outcomes and those products. In other cases, that process of building trust, increasing and improving our communication between our students and our adults, that shifting and sharing of power, and then transforming culture in the classroom, in the building, in the cafeteria, and in the gym and on the field, that process is just as important as the outcome. So for a practical exercise, we're going to practice steps 2 and 3. It'll be in an abbreviated format and also an accelerated format. It'll give us a chance to hear from students, take notes, synthesize those notes, and then discuss with our peers. We worked through this practical exercise with secondary staff, and the topics, themes, and engagement was really powerful, borderline transformational. And so I'm going to play the student dialogue clip. You are in step 2. Take a ton of notes. Feel free to pause the video after each question to debrief and synthesize your notes. A good protocol from the SYNTHESICATION is to organize your notes in themes with supporting points of discussion that came directly from the student comments. I want to thank you all for your commitment to students. Do the mirror work, do the window work. Let's change our practices, change our systems to pursue educational justice, equity, and inclusion. I look forward to seeing you all. Next, you're going to hear from our students.
What are your thoughts on civil unrest, the protests, and everything happening in your city, your country, and the world?
All right. My thoughts on the protests and the civil unrest that's going on in our cities right now is I'm all for it, and I think it's great that, you know, racism is like getting a bigger spotlight now in our generation. I mean, it's always been around, but I'm glad to see that like the Black Lives Matter protests and all the protesting and just really just making the situation and making the problems more aware. And not only that, but getting justice, like getting justice for the people who are affected by racism and police brutality. So yeah, protesting is great.
But I also think that the protests are really good because as she said, like we're continuing to see a pattern, and I just feel like this was like the wake up call for it all. Like everybody's really starting to see what's going on, and they're realizing it's just something that it needs to stop.
My thoughts is I think overall it's great. I love seeing like people my age going out and protesting. Like Nico said, racism is like it's been a big part forever, and I love after the George Floyd situation, the Breonna Taylor situation, that people are like giving a bigger push to end racism and stuff.
I think it's great. We're kind of giving like racism a voice now. We're fighting. We're having those hard conversations. We're fighting for what's right.
So I really just feel like it's really nice to see people coming together. I mean, I know that things like rioting they're not easy to see and they're not easy to hear about because nobody likes to see like violence, obviously. But it's good to see people becoming more like increasingly aware of the systems that were built and like the ways that like just taking like the police system, for example, it's just nice to see people becoming more and more aware about how our systems were built and the fact that they were built on the oppression of minorities, and just like coming from like a non-Black person of color who like obviously passes as white. Like it's interesting to also to see the way that our peers are reacting to it and seeing the ways that like my friends and other people's friends are reacting to and coming in support of it. So it's really nice to see.
I think that the amount of unrest and the protests that we have going on right now are all overdue actions and are all necessary. And I think that the way that our communities are responding to some of the issues that we have been faced with look the way that they do now because we are tired of years and years of the same story and the same tragedy. And I think that these protests and this unrest is finally going to be the spark to create the change that we have been waiting to see.
What role does your teacher or school play in what's happening? So where do you see your school and your teachers in this right now? What role do they play?
So I think that, of course, because teachers, I feel like, to me, they're like disconnected from reality, and like when I go into a classroom, I don't expect to be talking about like real world situations. I expect to like learn math, science, or whatever, right? But I feel like more teachers should at least educate or try to at least talk about, the racism and the hardships, like like kids in class, people of color in their class, they should give like outlets or, places to help or just talk about racism in general.
I feel like if we had some history being taught mainly, like it could, how do I say this? It could like place a barrier between that hate, because it's like whatever they're being taught at home, they come to school and they learn history and everything like that. And then it could kind of change their perspective on the things that they think. And so I don't think school or our teachers play a role right now, but I think that they could.
So it'd be important for a teacher to not to teach your classroom, but also understand their students on a personal level where they come from.
So they actually, in my opinion, play like a really important role, because our teachers and our mentors in our school, like our school boards, they hold such a high like position of power that they are our teachers. So as people who are meant to be listening to them and taking what they say in and really digesting that, like it's really important for our teachers and all of our role models in schooling really to be aware, and for them to be educating themselves as well with all the right information, because what they say really does have a long-lasting impact on everybody who they come in contact with. So yeah.
The role that the school plays is more important for students who are not going to be directly challenged in this issue, and gives them a place of education that I think that is like really necessary, and it's way more than just what they have to teach us. Like this is I feel like in a sense like this is preparing people for the outside world more than we acknowledge it as a school, because whether we like it or not, given how things are kind of just shaped the way they are right now, students like us are going to have to deal with this issue regardless of what we are or are not taught by our parents or by our teachers or by any other staff member. But those who learn and instead of experience, the role that our school could play is really teaching them to learn to be an ally, be helpful to like the cause, and then most importantly, be helpful to those students who are affected, who aren't just allies, but are actually experiencing issues. And overall, that's going to create some more well-rounded students and a more well-rounded community that is more able to fight to make a difference.
Do you want to hear from your teachers or principals about the issues of race, police, and justice?
I think just because of everything that is going on, we should hear from them and their opinions and their beliefs, whether we agree with them or not, because I mean, we don't all need to have the same beliefs and agreements, but I do think that we should be able to hear what they have to say to like know, how do I say this? Like if we relate with them or not.
Yeah, I want to have these conversations because it's like we need to have these hard conversations about stuff to fix things. So it's like we've been pushing it to the side, or like some teachers will be like in a history class and we'll start talking about race, but then they'll be like, no, let's not go too deep into it. But we need to go deep into it because it's like that's how we're gonna fix problems.
I think like racism needs to be a bigger part of schools. Like we talk, we have assemblies about like, the harms of vaping, like suicide and stuff like that. I think we should have like assemblies about racism and teach the whole school about it. I feel like racism should be a bigger topic that should be taught in school so we can educate, the youth and stuff.
Yeah, my take on, definitely teachers and principals should talk more about racism and police brutality and just overall everything that's happening right now, because I feel like it'd make more students interested in school in a way, and it'd make them feel more welcome to know that the problems that some of them face in their own personal life, they can talk about it with their teachers and their advisors, and they can get advice. And not only that, it's important because like racism and all the protesting that's going on, if we talk about it, learn about it, it's something that a lot of kids are passionate about, so they'll take it in more and they'll enjoy school more in a way. So not only are we getting awareness on racism, we're also involving students more and making them enjoy school more by talking about it.
I think it should be talked about in schools, and I think teachers can help to like educate people that don't understand, and help to like form better connections between not only the teachers and the students, but the students and the students. And it should be like a big topic that should be talked about in school.
Yeah, I think that it's really important. I would like to have heard from my teachers how they feel, what they think, because I would like to feel like my teachers take the time to understand me and understand the things that affect me, as well as every other student, not just me specifically, but like that they get us, or they care about what we go through. And I think that's really important, because I think I heard it a lot that this is political and so they can't speak about it, but I don't think that there's anything political about it. I think it's just supporting your students and what they're faced with, and I would like to see that kind of deflecting go away, and them instead just show us that they care.
Yeah, of course, I really want to see more discussion about it, even if it's an uncomfortable conversation for a lot of people to have. I don't think it should be uncomfortable, but because it feels like something people are uncomfortable to talk about it, we should be talking about it more, because bringing light to these subjects is really what we need, and we need more like really solid information to be like, we just really need to talk about all of this more, because the more that we push it away, the more it's going to come back in the future. And seeing the right people talk the right way about these issues, it would save a lot of people's lives. It would bring a lot more light to these subjects, and it would prevent from a lot of the violence happening now to happen in the future. So.
All right, last one. What do your friends and peers want or need to hear from your teachers about racial tensions and protests?
I think one thing we need to hear one thing teachers should do and understand is that even though say if it was a white teacher, even though I'm a minority, I'm not asking for handouts, if that makes sense. Do you know what I mean? Like, all because I'm not white doesn't mean you have to suck up to me and not give me more homework than the white kid or whatever. No, teachers should understand it should be like an equal treatment of all students regardless of their skin color. But even though it's equal treatment, also understand that skin color is still a problem to some people, and that goes to racism. So for the teachers, they should understand the skin color of their student and the troubles that comes with it, but also not treat them any different than how do I say, like, treat them any different than how they would treat a white kid, you know?
I think it should be like, I feel like teachers should talk about it, because I've had a few arguments, like trying to convince people, you know, about like racism and the problem. And it's always like, oh, about like, what about the right? And, you know, I feel like teachers should talk about that, teach those people who don't see the bigger picture and only focus on like the right and stuff, and teach them that it's more than that. You know, they're fighting for racism. It's not some small thing. You know? That's what I think.
I think that it needs to be known that we can, or they can have somewhere to go to if they need to talk about being discriminated against, or in school too, like if it happens in school. I think they need to know that they can do that and it won't be shut down or anything like that, and that school is a safe place for them to be able to talk.
I would just say, like, be there for your students, and just like, I would say also just like call it out if you see it. Like, if you see like a coworker or something being like racist towards students, like, don't be afraid to call it out. Don't be afraid to call it out.
That in this place, they are safe. They won't be like given bias, and that they're whatever they're feeling, that they're valid, and that this is a place for combating ignorance and creating empathy, which I think is like a really powerful thing to tell a student and let them know. Combating ignorance and creating empathy, which I think is like a really powerful thing to tell a student and let them know.
This is a big one. So I feel like I want my teachers to talk more about the sides of, like, not what's being televised or what's being really intensely talked about on mass media, because a lot of the times there are things you see on alternate outlets like social media or anywhere else that you'll see different sides of the story, and I really think that we need to talk about more than just what's being like mass broadcasted, because it's really important to see every single side of this story, because this is one of like the biggest, in my opinion, like the biggest movements that I've lived through, and seeing my teachers talk about reasons why, like rioting. I know that it's really hard to see riots and that kind of violence in the world, but seeing why groups of people who have been oppressed and shut out by almost every system that has been built against them, seeing those systems come down is really important. And if people have to riot in order to get that seen and get that heard and get the message out, I know it's hard to hear and hard to see, but it's important to notice that, because it's how the systems are going to be dismantled and how they're going to be rebuilt in a more just way. So, yeah. Dismantled and how they're going to be rebuilt in a more just way. So.